So, I finally played a horror game. Among the vast existing genres of games, there's at least one such genre you're probably averse to. Now, this may not apply to everyone, but most people I've spoken to are uncomfortable with the idea of playing games that fall into certain genres. For some, it may be real time strategy, or even platformers. What kind of monsters don't like platformers? And for others, aka me, it may have been horror games, or multiplayer online battle arenas, or just multiplayer games in general. When I heard that the Resident Evil 2 remake was gaining critical acclaim, and also a lot of praise from one of my closest friends, I was pushed into checking it out. Except, I was a year late. I saw it getting overthrown by the Game of the Year win, which went to Sekiro last year, and I was quite pleased with that decision. Only to then look back at the audience that was more inclined to have Resident Evil 2 win. It almost felt blasphemous that the award didn't go to RE2, and maybe before playing the game, I would have felt differently about that. Anyone who knows me personally knows that my favorite developer of all time is From Software. And my favorite game of all time is Bloodborne, no doubt. So when I say I'm glad that Sekiro won, but I consider it an equal to RE2, believe me that sentiment comes from a place of love and respect both to the games and the developers. Needless to say, I haven't played the original Resident Evil 2, so I decided to jump into this one with no sense of nostalgia. Regardless of my personal opinions against horror games, I played Resident Evil 2 in 2020 on the PlayStation 4, followed by Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 3. I have very strong opinions on all of them, but you're probably gonna hear only about Resident Evil 2 and 3 in this video. So, ladies, gentlemen, and my friends beyond the binary, I present to you my incredibly late review of Resident Evil 2. To begin, let me just say this. I've always been of the opinion that smaller areas with more concentrated bouts of activities, limited variety of challenges varying from map to map, and a certain sense of accomplishment for each and every action you complete makes the player feel more involved with the world. This doesn't mean that open worlds are indifferent to these aspects. Games like Horizon Zero Dawn, Breath of the Wild, and The Witcher 3 embrace having large maps with a lot of variety, but still keep players engaged through excellent world building. This game, however, is quite short, falls right into the bracket of what I find spectacular. Now, when I say the game is short, I'm not suggesting that it's something that contributes to the detriment of the title. If anything, it brings to the forefront a fundamental design attribute that many video games have forgotten today. While some other video games, like Dead Rising, Dying Light, or even parts of The Evil Within 2, make good use of an open world for horror, it feels like these games lose their element about halfway through and focus more on action instead of using spooks to keep the player engaged. This is also a trend that you see in the later games in the Resident Evil franchise. Amnesia and Outlast handle this particularly well, considering the fact that there is absolutely no combat in those games. Even Alien Isolation after a point devolves into an action game which feels like a huge disconnect from the initial identity that the game presents. Resident Evil 2, however, gives you a limited space where all the scares and fun are kept close-knit, concentrated almost, to provide an engaging and coherent experience, rather than having you wander aimlessly looking for something to do. And that is what makes this game one of the best linear experiences I have had in a while. Game length aside, I now want to get into why Resident Evil 2 was a standout among 2019's magnificent roster of video games. When you first boot up the game, you're requested to pick the character you'll be playing your first run with. This changes up the initial bits of the story, giving you a different perspective on either character's beginnings in the story. The premise is that a deadly virus known as the G-Virus has somehow affected the citizen of Raccoon City, and most, if not all, of the people have mutated into zombies. As always, our protagonists are then dragged into this rabbit hole of mystery, danger, intrigue, and scares, all in an attempt to take down the deadly Umbrella Corporation and their recondite practices. Your choices are to play either as Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop recently appointed at the Raccoon City Police Department, or Claire Redfield, who's in search of her brother Chris Redfield, an employee at the RPD. I made my decision to play as Leon first and later finish the true ending with Claire. Yes, this game needs to be played through twice, as both the characters have a different secondary narrative arc of their own. Leon meets up with Ada Wong in an attempt to take down the virus, and Claire must protect and deliver to safety Sherry, a girl lost in this nightmare. The story is quite the generic Resident Evil plot, but let's remember that when this was first written at the turn of the century, it was pretty much brand new. So, brownie points for that one. What is surprising is that the game remains unabashedly honest and true to its roots, even with an over-the-top narrative. And to hold your ground in an age like this one is truly commendable. It doesn't feel ashamed to give new players a taste of its old-timey originality, and it also has a significantly strong impact on those who revisited it with a dewy-eyed sentiment. This time around, Resident Evil 2 ditches the fixed camera perspectives and loading screen doors, which work to its advantage, and that's mainly because of the atmosphere that this game can establish. The game now has an over-the-shoulder perspective with a crippling feeling of claustrophobia. When you're in an open or well-lit environment like the safe rooms or the police station lobby, the tendency to feel safer and more confident is on a high. But this is almost like the game is mentally preparing you for the nightmares to come, almost immediately taking away your sense of safety as you step into a nearly unlit area with only your flashlight being able to illuminate a fraction of the environment in front of you. As the game progresses and the stakes are higher, even these so-called safe environments become infested with zombies and a certain pursuer. It constantly keeps the player on their feet and encourages a sense of urgency which is truly precious in this setting. Your only other companions in these environments are your weapons, of which you must unlock more as you play. The environmental design and backtracking elements make it so that the world state changes based on the player's actions, though heavily scripted. All of this ties into the great gameplay that's here. Your weapons range from pistols to shotguns to grenade launchers and miniguns, but they're all character exclusive to provide variety in multiple playthroughs, and a variety in combat for each playthrough. Where Leon would receive a shotgun, Claire would receive the grenade launcher. Inventory management is a major focus in this game, having the player make decisions based on what to carry and what not to carry depending on the inventory space they have. Puzzle elements and components take up inventory space, and this gives a sense of careful planning and forces the player to carry only that which is necessary, thus increasing the pressure and tension when the player is in a combat situation. It's truly nerve-wracking and incredibly tense, and that's something that I thoroughly enjoyed. Ammo can be scarce, so crafting components are given to the player in a few tight situations, but I learned that being prepared is always better than thinking about being prepared in retrospect. The puzzle elements here are simple yet challenging, and they have a sense of reward and accomplishment each step of the way. Unlocking cabinets nets you either healing material or gunpowder, or in some cases even ammo. Most other puzzles are scripted, which is where the variety comes in. Enemy design is again simple, limited, and works in the context of the game. This is where the game either introduces a new enemy type when the opportunity presents itself, or when an enemy type is location specific. But none of that would have probably worked without this exact presentation of the game. As I mentioned earlier, the atmosphere is what sells Resident Evil 2, almost like it was the foundation this game was built on. And that isn't very far from the truth. Without this tense atmosphere, the game would have been a lackluster, slow-paced action game with zombies in it. This stunning sense of crippling anxiety and fear induced in the game comes from some incredible visuals, breathtaking lighting effects, lack of background music, and an incredibly intricate design for the sound system. A lot of the credit here goes to the overwhelming detail that's gone into world building and the environment design. Medical gurneys and hospital beds are scattered throughout the precinct lobby. Bloodstains and scratches on the walls lead to a mangled corpse consumed by a liquor, and dark corridors are shut because some paranoid officer hit the battery to close the entryway. All of this adds up to the player having to ask questions about what exactly happened to this place. Apart from the aforementioned feeling of loneliness and claustrophobia, a creeping sense of immediate danger is always present while solving puzzles and unlocking cabinets. This is owed to the brilliant sound design, which is why I urge you to play it with surround sound headphones or with any sound system that supports surround sound. There's always sounds of soft growls, screeches, and certain dragging footsteps which can be heard at most inappropriate times, making the feel of the game all the more appropriate. It makes sure the player is isolated from a safe environment, even if it is in the comfort of their own couch or desk. The character and enemy designs are very unique, and as disgusting as the enemies are to look at, it cannot be discounted that they bring out a true sense of nausea with their grotesque body horror elements. The English voice acting for these characters is also actually quite good, falling short only in a few places, with our two main protagonists having perhaps the best voices in the game. Needless to say, all of this comes neatly packed in an experience that is about 12 to 14 hours long, having your first playthrough be no longer than the second and giving the player a bombastic true ending with an enigmatic sense of what should have come in Resident Evil 3, but unfortunately did not. So let's talk about it, shall we? My thoughts on Resident Evil 3 are not as positive as my opinion of Resident Evil 2, where the folks over at Capcom have made sure to rope in and impress a new audience, as well as induce nostalgia among the returning audience with Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 3 felt like an egotistical, bashful, overconfident game. With Resident Evil 2, you got two unique playthroughs and a bunch of extra content and challenges and whatnot. Resident Evil 3 Remake committed the cardinal sin of being sloppy. Not in its execution, but rather in its composition and presentation. Why would you charge full price for a game that is at best 5 hours long? And even if it is 5 hours long, why would you cut parts out of the original just to have your product work? Fundamentally, Resident Evil 3 is still a great remake, but with its lack of gameplay options, over-reliance on rushing the player through various sequences, and a deeply uninspired direction, it was clear that the publisher wanted to sell a multiplayer mode that was also deeply uninspired. It wasn't a complete failure, but it was a disappointment, no less. So, those are my views on Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 briefly. Let me know how you like this video. Comment down below for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. If you like this video, hit like, hit subscribe. I will do my thing. I'll be back here very soon. This is Kedar, signing off.